March 6, 1945, 2:30 in the afternoon, Cologne, Germany. Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartelborth sat inside the steel hull of his Panther tank, watching the destroyed streets through his commander's periscope. Around him, the city burned in a haze of smoke and dust. Cologne Cathedral towered above the rubble like a defiant sentinel, its twin spires somehow still standing after enduring 262 Allied bombing raids that had flattened nearly everything else. Behind his position, the Hohenzollern Bridge lay in ruins, blown up by German sappers just hours earlier to deny the Americans a crossing. There was no retreat across the Rhine now. His tank, from Panzer Brigade 106 Feldherrnhull, would make it stand here, a mere 360 feet from the cathedral doors. What none of them knew was that the next 30 seconds would produce the most famous tank duel in history, captured on 16mm film and broadcast to millions in newsreels across the world. More importantly, this moment would reveal a truth that shattered German confidence in their technological superiority. The Americans had arrived with something new, something Wehrmacht intelligence had failed to predict or even imagine. The transformation from German tank dominance to American armor parity would unfold in the time it takes to fire 3 shots. The psychological collapse had begun weeks earlier, though few Germans recognized it yet. Since the Normandy invasion 9 months ago, German tank crews had maintained an almost religious faith in the superiority of their Panther and Tiger tanks. They had destroyed Shermans by the hundreds, often at standoff ranges where the American tanks couldn't even scratch them. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun could punch through Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters with devastating reliability. In contrast, the Sherman's 75mm gun often bounced harmlessly off the Panther's sloped frontal armor, even at close range. In the hedgerows of Normandy, a single Tiger tank had once destroyed 25 Shermans before finally being disabled by a lucky flanking shot or airstrike. These lopsided victories fed German confidence even as their nation crumbled around them, fuel shortages, bombed factories, and endless retreats notwithstanding. The Panther, with its excellent mobility, thick sloped armor, and high-velocity gun, was seen as the pinnacle of tank design. Crews believed they held an unbridgeable technological edge. But something was changing on the Western Front, subtle at first but growing unmistakable. Starting in February 1945, American tank crews began reporting encounters with a new enemy tank, something that looked different, moved differently, and fought differently from the familiar Shermans. These reports described a larger turret, a longer gun, thicker armor, and hits that penetrated where Shermans failed. German intelligence dismissed these accounts as misidentifications, perhaps captured German vehicles being used against them, or exaggerated tales from rattled crews. The idea that America, portrayed in propaganda as a nation of mass-produced junk, incapable of sophisticated engineering, could develop a heavy tank to match the Panther or Tiger seemed impossible to minds shaped by years of indoctrination about American industrial incompetence and lack of martial spirit. The journey of that belief toward destruction began in the minds of American tank designers 3 years earlier, far from the battlefields of Europe. Fort Knox, Kentucky, summer 1942. The Armored Force Board met in a stuffy conference room to review combat reports streaming in from North Africa. American tank crews fighting in M3 Lee tanks and the first M4 Shermans were being slaughtered by German panzers at an alarming rate. The reports contained a disturbing pattern that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. German tanks could kill American tanks at ranges where American guns couldn't penetrate German armor. This wasn't a matter of superior training, better optics, or aggressive tactics, though the Germans had those too. This was physics, velocity, penetration, armor thickness, and slope. American tanks were outgunned, out-armored, and increasingly obsolete before they even left the factory. But bureaucratic inertia proved more powerful than battlefield reality. General Leslie McNair, commanding Army ground forces, vehemently opposed heavy tank development. He believed in a doctrinal division of labor. Tank destroyers would handle enemy armor with their high-velocity guns on lightly armored, mobile chassis, while Shermans supported infantry with volume of fire and reliability. Heavy tanks, he argued, were unnecessary complications that would strain logistics and production. His opposition, rooted in pre-war theory rather than current evidence, would cost thousands of American lives. The Sherman would remain the primary American tank throughout most of the war, with predictable and tragic results. In Normandy, American tank crews called their vehicles Ronsons after the cigarette lighter because they lit up so quickly when hit. British crews called them Tommy Cookers. The dark humor masked genuine terror, the knowledge that a single German round could turn their steel coffin into a crematorium. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction, born of frustration and ingenuity. In September 1942, a T-23 medium tank prototype underwent testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Engineers, desperate for a solution, mounted a 90mm anti-aircraft gun in its turret, creating what became designated the T-25. The results were promising. The gun could penetrate German armor at ranges where the Sherman failed. But McNair blocked production, insisting it violated doctrine. The debate raged through 1943 and into 1944 as American tank crews continued to die in inadequate Shermans. Reports from Italy and Northwest Europe painted the same picture: Shermans burning, crews bailing out under fire, German tanks dictating the terms of engagement. Finally, in January 1944, the Ordnance Department bypassed McNair through a clever bureaucratic sleight of hand. They redesignated the new design as a medium tank rather than a heavy, calling it the T-26. This allowed the program to proceed without directly challenging McNair's doctrine. The first T-26E3 tanks, later officially named M26 Pershing after the World War I general, rolled off production lines in November 1944 at the Fisher Tank Arsenal. They mounted a 90mm M3 gun that fired armor-piercing rounds at 2,800 feet per second and carried frontal armor over 4 inches thick, sloped for added effectiveness. Most critically, they could penetrate Panther frontal armor at 1,000 yards under combat conditions. For the first time since North Africa, American tank crews would fight on equal terms with German heavy armor. 20 Pershings were shipped to Europe in January 1945 for combat evaluation under the Zebra mission. The Army selected crews carefully, choosing experienced tankers from units with proven combat records who had survived the gauntlet of Normandy, the Bulge, and the push into Germany. Sergeant Robert Early from Fountain, Minnesota, commanded one such crew assigned to Easy Company, 3rd Armored Division. His gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer from Laheyton, Pennsylvania, had developed a reputation for deadly accuracy with the Sherman's 75mm. Now he would wield something far more potent. Their loader, Private John Derriggy from Scranton, had traded for a distinctive French tanker's helmet that made him instantly recognizable in photographs. Technical Corporal William McVeigh drove the beast, while Private Homer Davis operated the bow machine gun, always wearing his trademark knit tanker's hood that he pulled down like a balaclava in combat. They had been fighting together since September 1944 in Shermans, building a rhythm of survival through countless engagements. The crew named their new tank Eagle 7, after the Philadelphia Eagles football team, and their vehicle designation E7. In late February 1945, they climbed into the Pershing for the first time at a staging area near the front. The tank felt fundamentally different from their old Sherman. The interior was more spacious, allowing better movement during the chaos of battle. The gun was more massive, the armor thicker and more reassuring under their hands. The 90mm M3 gun dominated the turret, its breech mechanism more complex than the Sherman's 75mm, requiring precise coordination from loader and gunner. The armor plates felt solid, not the thin skin they were used to. But the biggest difference was psychological. For the first time, American tank crews didn't need to fear German armor from the front. They could fight back with confidence, knowing their rounds would bite. The Pershing's baptism by fire came on February 25, 1945, near the Roer River during Operation Lumberjack, the Allied push to clear the west bank of the Rhine. The 3rd Armored Division was advancing toward the rail hub of Elsdorf, about 30 miles west of Cologne. Eagle 7 moved cautiously through destroyed villages, every sense alert for German armor. The crew's new Panthers and Tigers prowled these sectors, using the rubble for concealment. Every destroyed building could hide a tank. Every rubble pile could conceal an anti-tank gun. The tension was unbearable, a constant weight on the chest. Then contact. A German tank appeared ahead, partially hidden by debris from a collapsed farmhouse. Smoyer identified it through his gunner's sight, Panther. The enemy tank hadn't seen them yet, its turret traversing slowly as if searching. Early gave the order to fire. Smoyer aimed carefully, adjusting for range, wind, and the slight movement of both vehicles. He squeezed the trigger. The Pershing rocked backward from the 90mm gun's recoil, a deeper, more authoritative thud than the Sherman's. The armor-piercing round crossed the distance in under 2 seconds and struck the Panther's frontal armor dead center. The penetrator punched through, something impossible with a Sherman at that range. The German tank erupted in flames, secondary explosions rippling through its hull as ammunition cooked off. The crew bailed out in panic, their vehicle destroyed in a single shot. Smoyer sat stunned behind his sight, hardly believing what had just happened. They had just killed a Panther from the front at extended range. It was a revelation. The new tank actually worked as promised. Word spread through American armored units like wildfire. The new tank worked. It could kill Panthers frontally. The Pershing had proven itself in its first engagement. But the real test came 2 days later at Elsdorf. On February 27th, the Wehrmacht launched a desperate counterattack with 4 King Tiger tanks and 2 Panzer IVs. These were Germany's best remaining tanks, manned by veteran crews in formidable machines. The Tigers alone outweighed Shermans by 20 tons and mounted the feared 88mm gun that had terrorized Allied armor since 1942. Sergeant Nicholas Maschlanek commanded Pershing No. 40, attached to Task Force Lovelady. When the German counterattack materialized from the treeline, his bucking tank moved forward to meet it head-on. At 1,000 yards distance, while his Pershing was still moving over uneven ground, Maschlanek engaged a charging King Tiger. He fired 4 armor-piercing rounds in rapid succession. All 4 struck home, penetrating the Tiger's thick frontal armor. The massive German tank exploded, its ammunition cooking off in a spectacular fireball that lit the battlefield. Maschlanek immediately shifted fire to 3 other German armored vehicles attempting to withdraw from Elsdorf. The Pershing's 90mm gun spoke again and again with mechanical precision. Within minutes, multiple German tanks lay destroyed or disabled, smoking hulks on the field. The engagement demonstrated that the Pershing could not just match German armor, it could dominate it when properly handled by skilled crews. Shermans still outnumbered Pershing's hundreds to 1 across the front. But now at least some American crews could match German heavy armor without relying on numbers, air support, or suicidal flanking maneuvers. More importantly, the existence of even 20 Pershings forced German tank commanders to reconsider their tactics. That dark shape in the distance might not be a Sherman anymore. It might be something that could kill them from the front at range. The comfortable assumptions that had sustained them, fire first, penetrate always, survive, were crumbling. Tank commanders who had grown confident destroying Shermans at long range now hesitated, scanning silhouettes more carefully, wondering if today was the day they met their match. The psychological impact rippled through German armored units like a shockwave. Tank commanders held hurried conferences in bombed-out barns, poring over sketchy reports. The comfortable assumption of German technological superiority was cracking. American tanks were no longer guaranteed kills. German intelligence struggled to understand what they were encountering. Reports from the front described American tanks with heavier guns and thicker armor that could shrug off 75mm hits. Interrogated prisoners mentioned a new tank type, but Wehrmacht analysts had no photographs, no technical specifications, no recognition training materials. The Pershing remained largely unknown to German forces even as it entered combat in growing numbers. This intelligence failure would prove fatal for many German tank crews who expected Shermans and encountered Pershings instead, dying to a weapon they didn't know existed. By early March 1945, the Allied drive to the Rhine was unstoppable, a tidal wave of steel and fire. General Courtney Hodges commanded First Army's push into the heart of Germany. The 3rd Armored Division spearheaded the advance toward Cologne, Germany's 4th largest city. Before the war, 800,000 people had called Cologne home, a thriving metropolis on the Rhine. Now the city lay in ruins, its population fled, dead, or hiding in cellars. The cathedral dominated the devastated skyline, a Gothic monument that had somehow survived the bombs that destroyed everything around it: factories, homes, bridges, lives. The battle for Cologne began on March 5. The 3rd Armored Division struck from the northwest, while the 99th Armored Division cleared sections south of the city, and the 104th Infantry Division attacked from the west. German resistance was desperate but disorganized, a patchwork of diehards, teenagers, and walking wounded. The Wehrmacht was collapsing, its units scattered and under strength, fuel and ammunition critically low. Most soldiers wanted only to cross the Rhine and escape the American advance, but some chose to fight to the end. Panzer Brigade 106 Feldherrnhall had been formed in October 1944 from remnants of various destroyed units, scraps of the 106th Panzer Brigade and other decimated formations. By March 1945, the brigade existed largely on paper. Perhaps 24 tanks remained operational, scattered across Cologne in 1s and 2s. Their mission was impossible: to defend a ruined city against an overwhelming enemy with air superiority, artillery dominance, and endless replacements. Most crews recognized the futility but stayed at their posts anyway. Some fought for comrades, some for Germany, some simply because they had nowhere else to go and surrender meant uncertainty. Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartelborth commanded one of these remaining tanks. An experienced officer who had been awarded the Honor Roll clasp of the Army for previous combat actions on the Eastern Front, Bartelborth refused to abandon Cologne when the order came to retreat across the Rhine. His Panther sat near the cathedral, positioned to ambush American tanks advancing toward the river along the main arteries. The cathedral itself may have influenced his decision. The Gothic structure, begun in 1248 and unfinished until the 19th century, represented German history and culture, a symbol that transcended the Nazi regime. To abandon it without a fight seemed unthinkable to a man who had fought from Poland to France to Russia. The tactical situation facing Bartelborth was grim but not hopeless in the short term. His Panthers sat at the intersection of several streets, all lined with rubble from Allied bombing that provided excellent cover and concealment. The destroyed buildings limited visibility to specific corridors but also created kill zones. He could see north up Marselinstrasse and west down Commodienstrasse, but side streets remained hidden until vehicles entered his line of fire. The Hohenzollern Bridge lay demolished behind him, cutting off retreat but also forcing the Americans to fight through the city center. German forces on the east bank of the Rhine could only watch as Cologne fell street by street. March 6 dawned cold and clear, the sky a pale winter blue that offered no cover from Allied Jabos if they appeared. American forces pushed deeper into Cologne, clearing streets block by block in brutal house-to-house fighting. The fighting was intense, with German snipers in upper floors, Volkssturm militiamen with Panzerfausts, and young boys from the Hitler Youth, some barely teenagers, trying to stop American tanks with handheld anti-tank weapons. Most died in the attempt, their bodies crumpled beside scorched launchers. The Americans advanced methodically, using their tanks to blast holes in buildings so infantry could enter and clear them room by room, grenades and flamethrowers finishing what shells started. By afternoon, they had reached the city center, the cathedral's spires visible through the smoke like church steeples in hell. Around 2 p.m., 2 Sherman tanks from Fox Company, 3rd Armored Division, advanced down Commodienstrasse toward the cathedral. Lieutenant Kellner commanded the lead Sherman, his crew moving cautiously, watching for Panzerfaust teams in the rubble. They encountered a pile of debris blocking the street, twisted girders and concrete chunks, and stopped to call for a bulldozer tank to clear the obstruction. This pause, innocent and necessary, put them directly in Bartelborth's line of fire down Commodienstrasse. The Panther fired without warning. The first 75mm armor-piercing round struck Kellner's Sherman just below the gun shield, penetrating the frontal armor with a sound like a giant hammer on steel. The impact was catastrophic. The shell killed Driver Private First Class Julian Patrick and Loader Technical Sergeant Curtis Spear instantly, their bodies torn apart by spall and overpressure. It severed Kellner's left leg below the knee in a spray of blood and bone. Shrapnel wounded gunner Corporal John Alogia in the face and arms. A second round followed immediately, striking within inches of the first hit. The incredible accuracy demonstrated the German gunner's skill and the Panther's excellent optics. The Sherman began smoking immediately, fuel and ammunition igniting. Kellner struggled out of the commander's hatch, his severed leg trailing smoke and blood behind him. Alogia clambered out and fell from the turret, landing hard on the cobblestones but alive. Kellner dropped onto the engine deck, unable to move further as shock set in. Soldiers rushed to help, including Stars and Stripes reporter Sergeant Andy Rooney, who would later become famous as a television journalist on 60 Minutes. They carried Kellner to cover behind a wall and applied a tourniquet, but the wound was too severe, the blood loss too rapid. He died within minutes, his eyes staring at the cathedral spires. The second Sherman, seeing the lead tank hit, attempted to reverse out of the kill zone, but the Panther fired again, striking its track and immobilizing it completely. The crew bailed out under fire and escaped into the rubble. 2 American tanks destroyed in seconds. 3 men dead, 2 wounded, all from 300 yards away. Bartelborth's crew allowed themselves a moment of grim satisfaction. Another pair of Shermans added to their tally. Eagle 7 idled at an intersection several blocks away, its crew listening to the radio chatter. Early and his men heard the explosions and saw smoke rising above the rooftops. The radio crackled with urgent reports. A Panther tank near the cathedral had just destroyed 2 Shermans from Fox Company. Easy Company was to advance immediately and destroy it. This was exactly the mission the Pershing had been designed for. The reason they had traded their reliable but vulnerable Sherman for this heavier, more capable machine. Signal Corps photographer Jim Bates heard the same radio traffic while filming the advance. He grabbed his 16mm camera and ran toward Early's tank, his boots crunching on broken glass and brick. Bates had been filming the advance all day, documenting street fighting, house-to-house combat, and the human cost of urban warfare. He wanted footage of the cathedral, the symbolic prize of Cologne's capture. The image of American tanks rolling past its doors would make powerful propaganda. Now he might get something even better, a tank duel in the shadow of history. Early and Bates went forward on foot to scout the Panther's position, dashing through rubble-strewn streets and ducking into doorways when sniper fire cracked overhead. They reached the mezzanine level of the Deutsche Arbeitsfront building, a damaged but standing structure with a clear view south down Marselinstrasse into the cathedral square. From there, they could see the Panther sitting at the intersection, its turret oriented west down Commodienstrasse where it had just destroyed the Shermans. The tank's right side faced Marselinstrasse completely exposed, its thinner side armor vulnerable. Early saw the tactical opportunity immediately. If Eagle 7 approached from Marselinstrasse, they could hit the Panther from its unprotected side before the German crew could react or traverse their turret. It should be an easy kill, a simple ambush from an unexpected direction. Bates set up his camera at a third-floor window with a clear view of both streets. The intersection formed a perfect T where Commodienstrasse met Marselinstrasse. He would capture whatever happened next, frame by frame. Early returned to Eagle 7 and explained the plan in clipped sentences. They would advance north on Unter Dominikaner, turn right onto Marselinstrasse, stop at the intersection, and fire one shot into the Panther's exposed side. Quick, simple, decisive. The crew understood and trusted their commander. McGay, the driver, started the engine with a roar that echoed off the ruins. Smoyer, the gunner, loaded an armor-piercing round into the breech. They began moving forward, the Pershing's tracks grinding over debris. But Bartelborth sensed something wrong in the silence that followed his kills. After destroying the 2 Shermans, he had expected more American tanks to appear from Commodienstrasse, rushing to support their comrades or avenge them. None came. The silence felt ominous, pregnant with threat. His instincts, honed by years of combat from the steppes of Russia to the fields of France, warned of danger from an unexpected direction. He ordered his driver to edge forward slightly, inching the Panther's hull into a better position, and his gunner to traverse the turret right, covering the northern approach up Marselinstrasse. The crew complied, confused by the change but trusting their commander's experience. The long 75mm gun swung slowly toward Marselinstrasse, toward the intersection where Eagle 7 would soon appear. In the Deutsche Arbeitsfront building, Bates watched through his viewfinder as the Panther's turret slowly rotated like a predator sensing prey. The long 75mm gun swung toward Marselinstrasse, toward the exact spot where the Americans planned their ambush. Bates realized with horror that Bartelborth had anticipated the American flanking move. The ambush had become a head-on duel. All he could do was keep rolling film, his heart pounding as history unfolded. Eagle 7 accelerated north on Unterdominikaner, the Pershing's 500 horsepower 4J engine growling. Inside the tank, the crew prepared for combat with practiced efficiency. Early stood in the commander's position behind Smoyer, his hands on the turret controls. De Riggy stood ready to load, his French helmet gleaming in the dim light. Davis operated the bow machine gun, scanning for infantry. McVeigh focused on driving, his eyes on the narrow street ahead. They could not see the Panther yet, did not know its turret had rotated, did not realize they were driving into a gun barrel pointed directly at them. McVeigh turned right onto Marselinstrasse with a lurch. The Pershing's bow entered the intersection first. Davis in the hull gunner position was first to see the Panther. His heart dropped like a stone. The German tank sat 110 meters away, its gun pointing straight at them, perfectly aligned. He screamed a warning that echoed in the steel confines, "Panther! Dead ahead!" McVeigh reacted instantly on pure instinct. Instead of stopping as planned, which would make them a stationary target, he slammed the accelerator to the floor. The Pershing lurched forward into the middle of the intersection, tracks screeching. Stopping would be suicide. Better to keep moving, even though that made accurate shooting nearly impossible in the bouncing turret. Smoyer rotated the turret as fast as the hydraulic traverse allowed, trying desperately to bring the 90mm gun to bear on the threat. Through his gun sight, he saw what Davis had seen. The Panther's gun tube filled his magnified sight picture, pointed directly at him. They were perfectly zeroed. In seconds, the German gunner would fire and Eagle 7 would burn like those two Shermans, its crew cooked alive. But inside the Panther, Bartelborth stared at the American tank through his commander's periscope and hesitated. This was not a Sherman. The silhouette was wrong, the turret was larger, the gun was too long and thick, the hull shape was different. For a critical moment, he wondered if this might be a German tank, perhaps one of the rumored new Panzers his superiors had spoken about in briefings, prototype heavy tanks that never materialized in numbers. He had never seen a Pershing before. Very few German soldiers had. Recognition training materials did not exist for a tank that American intelligence had tried to keep secret through camouflage and limited deployment. Bartelborth's daughter would later reveal in a German documentary that her father told the family he believed the tank entering the intersection was German. He expected a Sherman and did not immediately recognize the unfamiliar vehicle as American. For critical seconds, he held fire, waiting to confirm identification through his binoculars or periscope. Those seconds decided everything. Smoyer had no time for careful aim. The Pershing was still moving, bouncing over rubble. His gun sight was not perfectly aligned, the reticle dancing. Normally, gunners stopped before firing, stabilizing the gun for accuracy, but there was no time. The German tank was right there, its gun pointed at him like an accusing finger. He squeezed the trigger on instinct and training. The 90mm M3 gun erupted with a thunderous crack that deafened the crew. The recoil rocked the entire 45-ton tank backward. Orange flame flashed from the muzzle, illuminating the intersection. The armor-piercing round, weighing 40 pounds and traveling at 2,800 feet per second, crossed the 110-meter distance in a fraction of a second. It struck the Panther's right side just below the turret ring with a sound like the world ending. The tungsten carbide penetrator punched through the Panther's 80mm side armor as if it were cardboard. The shell entered the crew compartment, its explosive filler detonating inside the tank. Shrapnel tore through the interior in a storm of white-hot metal. The engine compartment immediately caught fire, fuel lines rupturing in the blast. Bartelborth reacted immediately, survival instinct overriding shock. He threw open his commander's hatch and leaped from the tank, landing on the far side away from the Pershing. 3 other crew members followed him out in a scramble, one with his clothing aflame, rolling on the cobblestones to extinguish the fire. They had to escape before ammunition began cooking off in the intense heat. 30 seconds earlier, they had been confident German tank veterans, masters of their domain. Now they fled for their lives from a tank they hadn't recognized, destroyed by a gun they didn't know existed. But the gunner, positioned deeper in the turret, could not escape quickly enough. He struggled toward the commander's hatch, his uniform burning, as Smoyer fired his second shot. The gunner could be seen in Bates's film, desperately clawing his way out of the hatch, one hand reaching for salvation. Then the second round struck. Smoyer had yelled for another armor-piercing round immediately after the first shot. His voice cutting through the din der Riggi rammed it into the breach with practiced speed, his muscles straining against the heavy shell. The Pershing had stopped now in the intersection, giving Smoyer a stable shooting platform. He aimed carefully at the burning Panther and fired. The second round hit the turret ring, the junction between turret and hull. The impact killed the German gunner instantly, his body slipping back into the turret to be consumed by flames that now roared from every opening. Smoyer fired a third time, his face grim behind the sight. He wanted to ensure the Panther would not fire back, that no German would use his last breath to kill Americans. The third armor-piercing round struck the hull amidships, penetrating completely and exiting the far side in a spray of molten metal. The Panther was now a raging inferno. Bright flames towered from the open hatches, licking the sky. The penetration holes glowed orange with internal fire. Ammunition began exploding inside, throwing sparks and debris through the hatches in rhythmic bursts. From first shot to last, 30 seconds had elapsed, perhaps less. The duel that would become history's most famous tank engagement was over almost before it began. Bates captured it all on film from his third-floor perch. 45 seconds of footage showing the Pershing entering the intersection, the three impacts, German crew members fleeing in panic, flames engulfing the Panther from within. The film was so clear, shot at 16 frames per second with a steady hand, that decades later, historians could count individual frames, identify crew members escaping, and even see the expression on the burning gunner's face as he reached for the hatch. Early radioed back to company headquarters that the threat was eliminated, his voice calm despite the adrenaline. Medics ran forward through the rubble to help the wounded Sherman crews, carrying stretchers and plasma. American infantry advanced past the burning Panther toward the cathedral, their rifles at the ready, stepping over the bodies of German defenders. Bates climbed down from the building, his legs shaking from the intensity, and ran to Eagle 7, shouting at Early over the engine noise. He thought he had captured the entire engagement on film, the perfect angle, the dramatic action, the symbolic backdrop of the cathedral. He asked the crew to stand in their open hatches so he could photograph them with the burning Panther in the background. That image, with Smoyer in his gunner's position, Early commanding, and the cathedral spires rising behind, would later become the cover of Adam Makos's book Spearhead, documenting the 3rd Armored Division's war from Normandy to victory. The psychological impact of the duel rippled outward immediately, like concentric waves from a stone dropped in still water. American tank crews who heard about it over the radio or in after-action reports felt a surge of confidence that bordered on euphoria. Finally, they had a tank that could fight Panthers and Tigers on equal terms, frontally, at range. The fear that had gripped Sherman crews since Normandy, the knowledge that German tanks could kill them long before they could respond, began to ease. At least for those who knew Pershings now fought alongside them in the Spearhead. Tankers who had spent months watching friends burn alive in Shermans suddenly had hope. They began requesting transfers to Pershing crews, willing to leave familiar units for a chance at survival and victory. Officers reported improved morale among armored units simply from knowing the new tanks existed and were proving themselves in combat. More importantly, the existence of even 20 Pershings meant American industry could produce heavy tanks when needed and produce them well. The technological gap was closing faster than anyone had imagined. American ordnance officers accelerated plans to ship additional Pershings to Europe, prioritizing them on convoys. Production was ramping up at both the Fisher Tank Arsenal in Michigan and the Detroit Tank Arsenal. By war's end, over 300 Pershings would reach Europe, though most arrived too late to see combat in significant numbers. The initial 20 had proven the concept beyond doubt. America could match German armor technology and outproduce it by factors of 10 or more when the will was there. For German tank crews, news of the duel triggered exactly the opposite reaction, a creeping dread that spread through the remnants of their panzer forces. The Panther at Cologne Cathedral had been destroyed by a tank they didn't recognize, using a gun more powerful than anything they expected Americans to possess. Intelligence reports from the front now included detailed descriptions of this new threat: American heavy tank, 90mm gun, thick frontal armor that could penetrate Panthers from the front at 1,000 yards or more. The reports spread through Wehrmacht armored units like wildfire through dry grass. German tank commanders held emergency briefings in cellars and ruined buildings. They studied what little intelligence existed about the Pershing, crude silhouette drawings based on distant observations and prisoner interrogations. Recognition training was hastily improvised using sketches and verbal descriptions. Tank crews were warned that not all American tanks were Shermans anymore. Some could fight back. Some could kill Panthers and Tigers with ease. The comfortable assumption of German technological superiority was officially dead, buried in the burning hulk by the cathedral. The psychological impact extended beyond tactical concerns to the very foundation of their worldview. If America could field heavy tanks with 90mm guns that outperformed the KWK-42, what else had they developed in secret? German soldiers had been told for years that American industry was inferior, that Americans lacked the engineering skill and martial spirit to match German weapons. The Pershing proved that narrative was a lie, propaganda that had sustained them through defeat after defeat. German officers who understood the implications realized the war was truly lost, not just militarily but industrially. America possessed both overwhelming industrial capacity and technological sophistication when it chose to apply it. Germany could no longer compete on either front. The factories were bombed, the workforce decimated, the resources exhausted. The Panther burned through the night and into the next day, its hulk remaining at the intersection for days afterward, a smoking monument to the limits of German armor even at its best. American soldiers posed for photographs next to it, pointing at the penetration holes with grins of triumph. The images show the 3 holes clearly, testament to the Pershing's firepower. One hole just below the gun shield where Smoyer's first shot struck the side, the other 2 marking the turret ring and hull where the follow-up rounds finished the job. The duel's fame grew rapidly in the weeks that followed. Bates's film made it into newsreels that played in American theaters within weeks of the battle. Smoyer's sister saw it in her local cinema in Pennsylvania, recognized her brother in the tank by his posture and the way he moved, and asked the theater to play it again the next day so her parents could watch. The footage showed American moviegoers that their soldiers now fought with tanks that could defeat German armor head-on. After years of hearing about Sherman inadequacy and the burning graveyards of Normandy, this came as a profound relief and a source of national pride. But Smoyer received no immediate recognition for his extraordinary shooting skill under pressure. A few days after the battle, military police caught him giving bubble gum to German children in violation of the non-fraternization orders then in effect. His pending Bronze Star recommendation was withdrawn as punishment, a petty bureaucratic cruelty that ignored the lives he had saved and the enemy he had destroyed. While Early and Bates both received Bronze Stars for their actions at Cologne, Smoyer and the other crew members got nothing but the satisfaction of survival. This injustice would stand for 74 years, a forgotten footnote in the annals of military bureaucracy. The Pershing's combat record after Cologne demonstrated the tank's capabilities against Germany's best armor in the war's final months. In the final 2 months of war in Europe, the 20 initial Pershings engaged numerous German tanks in combat across the collapsing Western Front, from the Rhine to the Elbe. The encounters validated everything the designers had promised in conference rooms years earlier. The 90mm gun could penetrate Tiger and Panther frontal armor at typical combat ranges of 500 to 1,000 yards. The armor could withstand hits from German 88mm guns at most engagement distances beyond point blank. The tank's mobility, while not as nimble as the Sherman due to its weight and lower power-to-weight ratio, proved adequate for the fluid battles of Germany's final collapse when roads were clear and fuel available. One Pershing near Elsdorf destroyed 4 German tanks, including a King Tiger, in a single engagement on February 27, the same action where Maschlanik earned his reputation. Another Pershing fought and destroyed a rarely seen Nashorn tank destroyer near Cologne, its open-topped design no match for the 90 mm at range. At the Battle of Remagen on March 7, 4 Pershings from the 99th Armored Division provided critical fire support during the capture of the Ludendorff Bridge, the first intact crossing of the Rhine. Their heavy guns suppressed German defenses on the east bank while engineers secured the span before demolition charges could be detonated, preventing the Germans from blowing the bridge and forcing a costly assault crossing elsewhere. Panthers and Tigers that had terrorized Sherman crews for 2 years learned to respect the new American heavy tank, or rather, to fear it. German tank commanders who spotted Pershings no longer advanced confidently into the open. They maneuvered cautiously, seeking hull-down positions and flanking opportunities, knowing they faced an opponent who could kill them as easily as they had killed Shermans for years. The technological balance had shifted, though too late to affect the war's outcome in any strategic sense. Germany's armored forces were already broken, their fuel exhausted, their replacement tanks and crews non-existent, their factories in ruins under Allied bombs. The Cologne's significance extended beyond tactical success and individual courage to represent a fundamental shift in American military-industrial capability. For the first time, America had designed and fielded a heavy tank specifically to match German armor in direct combat, frontally, without reliance on superior numbers or air support. The bureaucratic obstacles that delayed the Pershing for years cost American lives. Thousands of tank crew members who died in inadequate Shermans while the Pershing sat delayed by administrative inertia and doctrinal stubbornness. But once the decision was made and political obstacles removed, American industry delivered with impressive speed and efficiency. Production of Pershings accelerated dramatically after the Cologne Duel validated the design in the most public way possible. The February engagements at Elsdorf and Cologne provided real-world combat data that silenced remaining critics in the Ordnance Department and Army ground forces. By March 1945, both Fisher Tank Arsenal and Detroit Tank Arsenal were producing nearly 200 Pershings monthly, an astonishing ramp-up for such a complex vehicle. Over 2,000 would eventually be manufactured by year's end, with production continuing into the post-war period. The tank would go on to fight in Korea from 1950, where it again proved superior to North Korean and Chinese armor, and modified versions remained in American service into the 1950s, eventually evolving into the M26 Patton tank that equipped NATO forces during the early Cold War. The Pershing became the bridge between World War II armor and the main battle tanks of the future. German tank crews who survived the war remembered the Cologne Duel as a turning point in their psychological experience of combat. Before Cologne, many maintained faith in German technological superiority, even as their nation collapsed around them in fire and ruin. After Cologne, that faith eroded like sand through fingers. The Americans had closed the tank gap with a vengeance. If they could match Panthers with Pershings, what other capabilities had they developed in their vast factories across the Atlantic? The comfortable myths of German invincibility, nurtured by early war victories and Goebbels propaganda, crumbled under the weight of observed reality on a rubble-strewn street in Cologne. Bartelborth survived the battle and was captured shortly after escaping his burning tank, his uniform singed but his life intact. He lived to age 93, dying in the 1990s in Germany. According to his daughter's testimony in the German documentary Cologne 1945, Nachlaufnahmen, he spoke about the engagement to his family only rarely and with regret. His decision to hold fire because he did not recognize the Pershing haunted him for the rest of his life. That moment of hesitation cost the lives of his crew members and destroyed his tank. But what else could he have done? American intelligence had successfully kept the Pershing secret through limited deployment and strict operational security. Recognition training did not exist in the Wehrmacht for the new American tank. Bartelborth made a reasonable decision based on incomplete information. It simply proved fatal in a war where seconds decided life and death. The technical specifications told the story of how the balance had shifted from dominance to parity. The Panther mounted a 75mm KWK-42 gun that could penetrate 6.9 inches of armor at 1,000 yards with standard APCBC rounds. The Pershing's 90mm M3 gun could penetrate 7.1 inches at the same range with its HVAP tungsten rounds, and nearly as much with standard AP. The Panther's frontal armor measured 80mm, 3.15 inches, sloped at 55 degrees, giving effective thickness of about 140 millimeters. The Pershing's frontal armor measured 102 millimeters, 4 inches, at 46 degrees, effective thickness around 140 millimeters as well. In practical terms, the tanks could kill each other at typical combat ranges of 500 to 1,000 yards. Neither held overwhelming advantage in a stand-up fight. Success depended on crew skill, tactical position, first shot, and luck. But the broader implications reached beyond technical equality to the realm of production and sustainability. American industry had demonstrated the ability to design, produce, and deploy heavy tanks when strategic necessity demanded it, and to do so while simultaneously producing thousands of Shermans, tanks, destroyers, aircraft, ships, and every other implement of war. The bureaucratic delays that kept the Pershing from combat until late war reflected poor decision-making and inter-service rivalry, not industrial incapacity. Once authorized, American factories produced the complex vehicle in large numbers without disrupting other production. This capacity terrified anyone who understood what it meant on a strategic level. America could match German technology and outproduce it by factors of 10 or more in any category it chose. The strategic implications were devastating for Germany. They were fighting not just an army, but an industrial colossus. The human cost of the bureaucratic delays remained incalculable but immense. How many American tank crews died in inadequate Shermans while the Pershing sat delayed by administrative inertia and General McNair's doctrinal obsessions? Thousands, certainly, each one a husband, son, brother whose life was traded for theoretical efficiency. McNair's insistence that tank destroyers should handle enemy armor while Sherman-supported infantry proved catastrophically wrong in practice. Tank destroyers lacked armor protection and were forced to fight defensively from ambush. Shermans lacked gun penetration against heavy German tanks and burned easily when hit. The result was slaughter on a scale that haunted survivors. The Pershing arrived too late to save most of those crews, but its success ensured the lesson would not be forgotten. By March 7th, all of Cologne west of the Rhine was in American hands after intense street fighting. The battle cost the 3rd Armored Division about 100 casualties killed and wounded, a light toll by the standards of the campaign. German casualties were far higher, with thousands killed, wounded, or captured in the ruins. The Hohenzollern Bridge remained destroyed, preventing American forces from immediately crossing the Rhine at Cologne and forcing them to find another way. But further south at Remagen, the 99th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge intact on March 7th in a stroke of luck and daring, providing the crucial Rhine crossing that unhinged German defenses. The war in Europe would end 2 months later with Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8th. The crew of Eagle 7 continued fighting after Cologne, their Pershing carrying them across the Rhine south of the city at Remagen and pushing deep into the heart of Germany. They advanced through Marburg and Paderborn, fighting rearguard actions against SS units and improvised Kampfgruppen, before reaching Dessau on the Elbe River. The war ended for them in early May when German resistance collapsed completely and Soviet forces linked up with American troops. All 5 crew members survived the war, a rarity for tankers who had fought from Normandy to the Elbe, though they carried psychological scars that would last lifetimes. Tank warfare was literally hell on wheels. Men lived for weeks in cramped steel capsules, unwashed, exhausted, constantly threatened by Panzerfausts, mines, artillery, and enemy tanks. The stress broke many soldiers, leading to combat fatigue, nightmares, and breakdowns. Smoyer returned home to Pennsylvania after the war, where he married Melba, the woman who had sent him homemade fudge during combat in care packages that sustained his spirit. They were married for 70 years before she died in 2017. Smoyer worked as a supervisor at an industrial cement plant in Allentown, a steady job that provided for his family. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, turning off the television when war movies came on and closing windows during 4th of July fireworks that sounded too much like incoming shells. The memories were too painful, too raw even decades later. In 2013, author Adam Makos brought Smoyer back to Cologne for the first time since the war as part of research for his book Spearhead. The trip was part research, part therapeutic journey for the veteran. Smoyer walked the streets where he had fought, stood at the intersection where the duel occurred, now a quiet plaza with memorials, and visited Cologne Cathedral, touching its ancient stones. The experience was overwhelming. Decades of suppressed memories flooded back in a torrent. But the trip also provided unexpected healing and closure. Smoyer met Gustav Schaefer, a German tank crewman who had fought in a Panzer IV near the cathedral on that same day. The two veterans, former enemies who had tried to kill each other in the abstract of war, became friends over shared coffee and stories. They discussed their shared experiences, the horror and futility of war, the lives destroyed on both sides by decisions made in Berlin and Washington. Both men also confronted their feelings about Katharina Esser, a young German woman killed in crossfire shortly before the Panther duel when American tanks fired into buildings harboring German snipers. Neither knew for certain who fired the shot that killed her, a Sherman, a Pershing infantry, but both carried guilt for the civilian deaths that were inevitable in urban combat. They visited her grave together in a Cologne cemetery and spoke about forgiveness, reconciliation, and the common humanity that war had tried to erase. The publication of Spearhead in 2019 brought Smoyer's story to wide public attention for the first time. Makos documented not just the Cologne duel but the entire journey of Eagle 7's crew through the war, from training at Fort Hood to the beaches of Normandy, for some, through the Bulge to victory. The book became a bestseller, introducing new generations to the sacrifices of armored warfare veterans and the reality of combat beyond glory and statistics. More importantly, it prompted someone to address the Bronze Star injustice from 1945. Makos launched a campaign to award Bronze Stars to Smoyer and the 3 other crew members who had received nothing after Cologne despite their decisive action. He gathered eyewitness testimony from survivors, compiled documentation from Bates's film and after-action reports, and submitted the request through proper channels with congressional support. The Army reviewed the evidence and agreed that an oversight had occurred. On September 18, 2019, 74 years after the Cologne duel, the Army finally awarded Bronze Stars to Eagle 7's crew in a ceremony at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Clarence Smoyer, age 95 and the last surviving crew member, received his medal in person from Army officials, his hands trembling as he saluted. Private Homer Davis, Private John Deriggy, and Technical Corporal William McVeigh received their medals posthumously, accepted by family members who wept at the recognition their fathers and grandfathers had earned but never received. Sergeant Robert Early, the tank commander, had previously received his Bronze Star in 1945 and was honored posthumously at the ceremony as well. Hundreds attended, including World War II reenactors in period uniforms, historians, family members, and veterans from later conflicts. Smoyer's speech at the ceremony captured the essence of what the recognition meant after so long. He dedicated the award to all the young men who died in the war, especially those who fought in tanks and never came home. He spoke about honor, sacrifice, and remembrance without bravado. He did not glorify war or claim heroism for himself. Instead, he bore witness to the cost of conflict and the necessity of remembering those who paid that cost. The crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted minutes. The Cologne Cathedral duel entered military history as one of the most documented tank engagements of World War II, perhaps the most documented of any war. The Bates film provided unique visual evidence of an armored duel from start to finish, allowing frame-by-frame analysis. Historians could study the footage to examine tactics, crew behavior under fire, weapon effects, and timing down to fractions of a second. The engagement became a case study taught in military academies around the world, demonstrating the importance of surprise, crew training, weapon technology, and the psychological element of recognition. But the duel's significance extended beyond tactical lessons to the strategic and human levels. It represented the moment when German tank crew confidence in their technological superiority began its final collapse. For years, they had dominated Allied armor with Panthers and Tigers through superior guns, armor, and optics. Suddenly they faced American tanks that could kill Panthers from the front at range with equal or better penetration. The psychological impact was devastating, a crack in the foundation of their professional identity. If Americans could match German heavy tanks, what else could they produce in their limitless factories? The comfortable myths of German invincibility died in that intersection near Cologne Cathedral, replaced by the grim reality of material inferiority. The statistics validated what the Duel demonstrated in microcosm. By April 1945, American forces had crossed the Rhine in strength at multiple points. The Wehrmacht collapsed rapidly under overwhelming material superiority, thousands of tanks, unlimited artillery, complete air dominance. German tank units that had terrorized Allied armor in Normandy were destroyed or scattered, their crews surrendering en masse when fuel ran out. Fuel shortages immobilized many remaining tanks, leaving Panthers and Tigers as static. Pillboxes unable to maneuver or retreat. Ammunition ran out. Replacement parts vanished. Even the vaunted Tigers and Panthers were reduced to burning hulks beside autobahns. American industry had produced the tools of victory in such quantities that German resistance became futile, a mathematical certainty. The Pershing program's troubled development history demonstrated both American industrial capacity and bureaucratic dysfunction in equal measure. When finally authorized, American factories produced the complex tank efficiently and in parallel with other programs. But the delays caused by inter-service politics and doctrinal rigidity cost lives unnecessarily, lives that could have been saved with earlier deployment. The lessons learned influenced post-war American armor development profoundly. Never again would bureaucratic obstacles delay needed equipment while soldiers died in inadequate vehicles. The memory of Sherman crews burned alive in their tanks ensured that future generations of tank designers would prioritize survivability, firepower, and mobility above theoretical doctrine. Eagle 7 itself survived the war and was eventually shipped back to the United States after serving in occupation duties. The tank that fought at Cologne Cathedral ended its days as a museum piece at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor, preserved as a monument to the crew who made it famous and to American ingenuity under pressure. Visitors can still see the vehicle today, its steel hull scarred by combat splashes and small arms fire, its guns still pointed forward as if ready to fire at shadows from the past. The tank represents not just one crew's courage but America's industrial transformation during World War II, from a nation unprepared for armored warfare to one that could match and exceed any opponent. The crew members' later lives reflected the quiet heroism of their generation, the greatest generation that asked for no glory and expected no parades. They returned home, found jobs, raised families, and rarely spoke about their wartime experiences to anyone outside their immediate circle. Smoyer worked his entire career in industrial management at the cement plant. DeRiggy returned to Pennsylvania and lived a quiet life. Davis went back to Kentucky, where he farmed and raised a family. McVeigh settled in Michigan with his wife and children. Early lived in Minnesota until his death. They were ordinary men who had done extraordinary things when their nation needed them, then faded into civilian life without complaint. Their reward was simply to survive and build normal lives after years of hell on wheels. The Cologne Duel's fame endured because it captured in miniature the larger story of American victory in World War II. Overwhelming industrial capacity, technological innovation when needed, and the courage of ordinary soldiers combined to defeat enemies who believed themselves superior by blood and design. The Duel showed that American tankers could match German veterans when given adequate equipment, and that the Pershing provided that equipment, too late for most of the war, but decisively when it mattered. The transformation from German tank dominance to American parity happened remarkably quickly once the decision was made to proceed with heavy tank development. The Pershing went from concept to combat in less than 2 years, a testament to American engineering and production flexibility. Despite bureaucratic obstacles, American industry demonstrated the ability to design new weapons systems and produce them in quantity while simultaneously manufacturing existing equipment in unprecedented volumes. Shermans by the tens of thousands, Liberty ships by the hundreds, B-17s by the thousands. This industrial capacity, more than any battlefield tactic or individual act of bravery, ensured Allied victory. It was the ability to outproduce the enemy in every category that mattered: tanks, planes, shells, trucks, fuel, that ground down the Wehrmacht and made defeat inevitable. The burned-out Panther at Cologne Cathedral became a symbol photographed thousands of times in the days after the battle. American soldiers posed next to it with cigarettes dangling, pointing at the penetration holes. German civilians walked past it in shock, some weeping at the destruction of their city. The Hulk sat at the intersection for days, its steel still glowing with residual heat in places, ammunition still occasionally exploding inside with dull thumps. Eventually, salvage crews towed it away for scrap, but images of the destroyed tank spread worldwide through newspapers and newsreels. The photographs showed what American industry had finally produced: a tank that could kill Panthers with contemptuous ease. The Cologne Cathedral itself survived the war with surprisingly limited damage despite being in the center of the bombing. The Gothic structure had been struck by bombs and shells over 70 times during the war but never collapsed, its thick stone walls and fortunate near misses preserving it. Its twin spires remained standing throughout 262 air raids, a symbol of endurance that inspired both Germans and Allies in different ways. American forces took care not to shell the cathedral during the street fighting if possible. Early later said in interviews that he was careful not to hit it with rounds aimed at the Panther, recognizing its cultural value even in the heat of battle. The building represented cultural heritage that transcended the war's politics and hatreds. Its preservation amid total destruction around it seemed almost miraculous, a Gothic island in a sea of rubble. The human stories behind the duel remained largely unknown for decades, buried in official reports and personal memories. Smoyer rarely spoke about his experiences, even to his children. Bartelborth returned to civilian life in Germany and avoided publicity, working as an engineer and raising a family. The other crew members on both sides simply wanted to forget the war and rebuild their lives. Only the film remained, playing occasionally in documentary programs on the History Channel or in university lectures, but largely forgotten by new generations more concerned with Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan. The heroism and sacrifice embodied in that 30-second engagement faded from public consciousness, another footnote in the vast encyclopedia of World War II. Adam Makos's research changed that permanently. By documenting the lives of participants in exhaustive detail, by traveling to Cologne to walk the battlefield with survivors, by interviewing family members and combing through archives in multiple countries, he reconstructed not just the tactical engagement but its human meaning, the fear, the split-second decisions, the lifelong consequences. The book's spearhead told the full story from crew training at Fort Benning through combat in Normandy, for the unit, the Bulge, the Rhine, to post-war life and reconciliation between former enemies. Readers discovered that war's reality was far more complex and tragic than simplified narratives suggested. No clear heroes and villains, just young men on both sides trying to survive a machine larger than themselves. The recognition ceremony in 2019 provided closure for Smoyer and validation for the other crew members' families after 3 generations. The Bronze Stars acknowledged what had been obvious in 1945. That Eagle 7's crew performed with extraordinary courage and skill under fire, destroying a dangerous enemy in a situation where hesitation meant death. The delay of 74 years made the recognition bittersweet. Most participants were long dead, but Smoyer lived to receive his medal and speak about what it meant to him and to the memory of his crew. His testimony ensured the next generation would remember not just the duel but the cost paid by ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances. The Cologne Cathedral tank duel stands today as history's most documented armor engagement, a 30-second period captured on film that revealed fundamental truths about technological competition, industrial capacity, and human courage under fire. German tank crews who believed in their superiority learned that American industry could produce weapons to match anything Germany fielded, and in numbers that made individual excellence irrelevant. American tankers who feared German armor discovered they could fight back when given adequate equipment, that courage and skill mattered when the tools were equal. Both sides paid for lessons that should have been learned earlier in lives destroyed and futures never realized. The final truth revealed at Cologne was simple but profound. Technological superiority means nothing if industrial capacity cannot sustain it in the field. Germany produced excellent tanks. The Panther was arguably the best overall design of the war, but could not produce enough to matter against the Allied tide. America initially produced inadequate tanks in the Sherman, but then designed and manufactured superior ones in overwhelming numbers when the need became undeniable. The Pershing arrived late, but its arrival signaled that American industry had finally responded to the challenge with decisive effect. Future enemies would face not just superior numbers, but superior technology as well when America chose to apply it. The combination proved unstoppable in 1945 and would define the post-war world. Smoyer died in 2022 at age 99, the last surviving member of Eagle 7's crew, having lived long enough to see his story told to millions, his sacrifice recognized by his nation, his friendship with former enemies celebrated as a model of reconciliation. His quiet dignity in those final years exemplified his generation's character. They asked for no glory, expected no recognition, simply did their duty and came home to build a better world. That they also happened to participate in history's most famous tank duel was almost incidental to who they were as men, soldiers, citizens, fathers, grandfathers. The lesson of Cologne Cathedral resonates today in an era of drones, cyber warfare, and hypersonic missiles. Victory in war requires not just courage but capacity, not just tactics but technology, not just determination but resources in depth. The Pershing demonstrated that America possessed all these elements in 1945 and could bring them to bear when leadership finally allowed it. The duel demonstrated that German veterans, despite superior skill and experience honed in years of combat, could not overcome material disadvantage when the enemy closed the technological gap. The 30 seconds captured on film by Jim Bates showed the world that American power had reached maturity, capable of matching any enemy in any field of competition when the will was there. That power, combined with Allied determination and sacrifice, ensured Germany's defeat and Europe's liberation from tyranny. The price was measured in lives, including those of tank crews on both sides who fought with skill and courage in a war that should never have been necessary. The Pershing arrived too late to save most American tankers who died in Shermans, but its success ensured their sacrifice would lead to better equipment for future generations. The duel at Cologne Cathedral remains a testament to human ingenuity, the cost of bureaucracy, and the ultimate triumph of industrial democracy over technological authoritarianism. It is a story of fire and steel, of hesitation and decision, of recognition delayed and justice deferred, but ultimately, a story of victory won through the blood and genius of ordinary men given the tools they needed to fight and win.